We're living in a unique moment, and immigration is a part of our country's story, and with it, racism and xenophobia have lived and thrived. This is not news to any of us, but in our more recent history, we have seen a shift. Hate that for many years was kept behind closed doors, that secretly motivated policymakers, is now entering the mainstream in new ways, resulting in increased harm, targeting, human degradation, and the absence of basic decency. This treatment comes not only from the common citizen, but also from levels of government and elected officials. The pandemic has merely exacerbated this situation. Xenophobia and racism have been joined in this country forever. They are both part of a web of oppressions, deciding who will be welcome, who will be respected, who will have access to resources, to opportunities, to safety, to justice. When we as individuals or as a country ignore any opportunity to push back against that harm, we do ourselves a great disservice. Despite the challenge of the time, there is hope. America's great welcome sign to the world, the Statue of Liberty, is a reminder of the hope and freedom we must collectively demand. It has survived 23 presidents and will survive this one and those that come after we are gone. Regardless of where we are born, today everyone is facing unique challenges. But for some, those challenges are complicated by policies and practices that create greater obstacles to freedom for some in our country. There are greater risks of becoming sick, of becoming homeless, of being incarcerated, or losing the right to vote. Being able to call America a home, being able to have a home. We have faced challenges before, and we will commit to overcoming them today. Some of you will recall the challenge that the people of California faced 25 years ago. It was not a global pandemic, but the racism and xenophobia was similar to what we are living through today. It was political, it was targeted, it inspired fear, and it was degrading. And I am referring to November 8th, 1994, the day that California voters approved Proposition 187, which was a ballot initiative that denied public services to immigrants living in the United States without legal status. In the fall of 1994, Republican Governor Pete Wilson was running for re-election. And on television, on cable television, which some of us used to watch regularly, in between episodes of Murphy Brown and the X-Files, his re-election ads showed a grainy video of people running across the border from Mexico, while an anonymous narrator said, quote, "They keep coming. 2 million illegal immigrants in California." The ad also bragged about how he had sent the National Guard to the border. Does any of this sound familiar? Voters decided that unless you can prove that you or your children were United States citizens or legal residents, access was cut off to non-emergency public health care, elementary, middle, and high school education, public colleges, and universities. The initiative also required state and local agencies to report immigrants who didn't meet the residency criteria to state officials and federal immigration authorities. Does any of this sound familiar? 3 weeks before the election, during a gubernatorial debate, Governor Wilson was asked if he would be able to, quote, look a second grader in the eye and call the INS, which was the predecessor organization to ICE. His answer was, quote, "I make no apology for putting California children first. Yes, those children who are in the country illegally deserve an education. But the government that owes it to them is not in Sacramento or even in Washington. It's in the country from which they have come." I think we've heard this response more than once in the past 25 years. 59% of Californians voted in support of this disgraceful initiative. Despite passage of the measure, opposition was strong. And the same day that he gave that reply, the same day of the debate, more than 70,000 protesters marched through the streets of Los Angeles. 6 days before voters went to the polls, 10,000 students walked out of 30 area Los Angeles high schools, one of the largest ever student strikes in this country. Lawsuits were quickly filed after the vote. A preliminary injunction was issued. There were more lawsuits and there were more appeals. But ultimately, 2 years later, Proposition 187 was declared unconstitutional. It took almost 2 decades later for it to be completely wiped off the California law books. But we learned something. We learned how Californians who voted at the time felt about immigration. We learned that the government supported an initiative that targeted immigrants and their families and was willing to go to court to get the authority to act. We also learned that the courts can serve as a critical ally. And perhaps most importantly, we learned when in the face of great challenges, in the face of dehumanizing government actions, good people will rise up. Good people will organize, protest, and advocate. When we think of the California of 2020, where all cities and towns must follow the state's sanctuary city law, which prohibits most types of law enforcement cooperation with federal immigration agents, we can trace its origins to the day Proposition 187 passed. The almost 60% majority inspired and motivated a generation of people to become citizens, to vote, to study, to become entrepreneurs, to run for public office, to change California. Between 1994 and 2019, just last year, Asian public representatives in California grew from 2.7% to over 11%. Latino representatives went from 11.4% to almost 25%. White elected representation went down from 79% to 56%. And on the current track, in the very near future, Latino representatives will outnumber white representatives. To this day, Proposition 187 remains one of the most divisive measures in state history. Yet it was preceded by abhorrent anti-immigrant measures as early as 1858, when California passed a law that made it illegal for any person of the quote Chinese or Mongolian races to enter the state. That was similarly struck down by the California Supreme Court in 1862. The point being that we've endured these anti-immigrant laws in the past and have found ways to overcome them. Proposition 187 is the blueprint we find ourselves in today, for the situation we find ourselves in today. The combination of laws, regulations, and rhetoric combined with the coronavirus pandemic has created a lethal environment, an environment where America's historic inequities based on color, socioeconomics, gender, and country of birth are highlighted. This has fueled the spread of misinformation, racism, xenophobia, and anti-Semitism. The resulting vitriol and scapegoating have targeted large segments of the American population. Just as it was in television ads in 1994, elected officials are the fuel that keeps the xenophobic fire burning. We cannot allow the spread of the virus and social distancing to sow philosophical division among us and lead to policies that harm the most vulnerable and marginalized populations. People from almost every state are represented at this conference. Collectively, this is a brain trust of experts. And I'm not going to cite the number of people in ICE custody or talk about the positive impact immigrants have on this country. Rather, and most importantly, I want to recognize that we, under the leadership of the Immigrant Learning Center, and every person on this call, we are the descendants of the people who filled the streets of LA in 1994. We are the beneficiaries of collaboration that advocates and religious leaders initiated a quarter century ago. We are here because of the advocacy of thousands of lawyers. It is up to us. We are the agents of change of 2020. And our voices are just as important as they ever were. Our commitment to each other is just as important as it ever was. We have a responsibility now, just as we always have, to ensure that the American ideal of liberty is afforded to everyone. And as we continue this urgent work, we should remember that hope is a necessary part of our fight. Just as the leaders of 1994 rose to the challenge and forever changed the state, so must we rise to the challenge of 2020. We have to imagine a world that is better, believe that it is attainable, and then create it. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for that very powerful reminder and message, Robert. If there's one thing you want to leave attendees with today, maybe a message of action or strength or hope, what would it be?
I think the message is that it is up to everyone on this call. We need to be the leaders. And when we leave the call, we need to be talking and leading others. That's how change is effectuated. And so it is really up to us to mobilize and bring others with us.